Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto also gets the sealing knowledge along with his father's bloodline and gets a harem, part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. She clapped. Good one eye. Naruto Uzumaki is known as a prankster who can outrun and hide from Anbu. Really, did no one see through this before? She asked curiously. The crowd was silent. Suddenly, she busted out laughing just like before. She wiped a tear from her eye. You really think the dead last can outrun Anbu? Kami people, you really are dense. She said, offering no more information. Sarutobi rubbed his temples. Great. Just great. If he's hiding more, could he be in contact with Kyuubi? This is a serious breach and I need to make sure that he's still loyal to Konoha. He thought. Suddenly Naruto's voice rang out through the jutsu used to display the exams and everyone looked to see him standing outside alone and looking to the sky. I know you're watching Oji-san and I know that Anko-san has probably spilled that I hid my abilities. Keep watch on Mizuki, I think he's up to something. Have a good day Oji-san, he said with a chuckle at the end as he walked inside. The room grew silent until Sarutobi spoke again. Anko-san, you are to watch Mizuki for any signs of dissent or traitorous acts starting now. Leave the room once the exams are over and tail him. He ordered. Anko nodded and everyone turned their attention back to the exams. Academy classroom. Ninjutsu tests. Naruto walked in just as the first person was called into the back room to begin the final examination. He took his seat and cheered when Sakura came back out of her test. Kami, I can't wait to pass this test so I can drop this stupid mask. Naruto thought to himself. Although, I know Oji-san is going to speak to me about this, probably even make sure I'm still loyal to Konoha. Even if he believes I am, he's still going to put someone on my team who can control me if I let Kyuubi-chan out. Good thing I gave Shino that bug, he may prove useful. Naruto thought. What most people didn't know was that Naruto was on good terms with Shino, and most of the Abarames, so he doubted that Shino would hurt him if something happened. Naruto Uzumaki. Iruka said. Naruto smiled brightly and jumped up to take the test. He ran down the steps, tripping at the bottom to ensure that his mask was still ironclad, and scratched the back of his head nervously as he entered the exam room. Iruka smiled at him, along with a fake smile from Mizuki, and said, Alright Naruto, you need to perform a kawarimi, henge, and a bunshin technique to pass this portion. You can also show an additional jutsu for extra credit. Iruka said, gaining a nod from his favorite student. Ready? He asked. Naruto nodded again and promptly switched with a chair when Mizuki hummed an eraser at his head. He switched back and Iruka said, Henge into the third Hokage please. Naruto nodded and performed the jutsu. Iruka and Mizuki checked it out, Mizuki taking a full minute longer than Iruka, before declaring it passable from Mizuki and great from Iruka. Now please perform a bunshin. Iruka said. Naruto raised his hand like he had a question, causing Iruka to raise an eye. Yes Naruto, he asked. Can it be any bunshin or does it have to be the illusionary ones? He asked. Iruka thought for a second before grabbing the rulebook and skimming through the pages. It states here that any bunshin may be used if the user has too much chakra to support the illusionary one. Iruka replied. Mizuki scowled mentally and simply stared closely at Naruto. Naruto smiled and said, Thanks Iruka-sensei. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu, and 5 Naruto stood smiling brightly at a stunned Iruka and a scowling Mizuki. Iruka stammered out why you pass Naruto. But, how did you learn a kinjutsu? He asked. Naruto chuckled. I watched some dog-masked Anbu do it in a training field one time and memorized the hand seals thinking that I might be able to do it instead of the regular bunshin, since Kage Bunshin costs far more than the regular one. He answered. In the Hokage Tower, Sarutobi was glaring at Kakashi because he had been so careless. Anko was mentally chuckling and everyone else was stunned. Naruto had learned to do a kinjutsu just by seeing it done once. Impressive. Back with Naruto, Iruka handed him a headband with a giant smile and Naruto yelled an, "Alright." He smiled brightly and ran out the door to show off his new Hitai-8. Most of the students were stunned, but Hinata, Shikamaru and Shino all had their own thoughts, mostly positive ones. Naruto smirked as the teachers came out and dismissed them, telling them to be back tomorrow for team assignments. Naruto promptly ran to Ichiraku's and began to pig out on ramen, courteous of Tyuki and Ayame. He was able to eat 10 bowls before an Anbu showed up and said that the Hokage had summoned him to his office. Naruto sighed and nodded his head before paying for his dinner and leaving with the Anbu. Hokage's office. Naruto's ninjutsu exam time. Sarutobi had finished glaring at Kakashi and nodded to Anko, who had taken her leave to spy on the academy teacher. He turned back to the aspiring Junin sensei and said, "I will now take suggestions and requests for students," he said. He nodded to Kakashi, who had the most senior rank among them, and he stood up. "I request Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno and Naruto Uzumaki for my team," he said before sitting back down. Sarutobi frowned. Because of Naruto's performance, he knew he couldn't accept that team because it would be far too overpowered. Besides, that he knew that Naruto needed someone who could control the Kyuubi, now more than ever, if his skills were better than before. Sarutobi couldn't have a Kyuubi-fied genin running around now, could he? He nodded and said, "Noted." Asuma stood up next and said, "I'll take the next Inoshika Cho team." He quickly sat back down, being the lazy man that he is. Sarutobi nodded and a few of the other Junins stood up and requested Sasuke, but were summarily denied. Finally, Kurenai stood up and said, "I request Hinata Hyuga, Shino Aburame, and Kiba Inuzuka for a tracking team," she said before sitting back down. Only one person had not gone, and that was because he didn't want to be here, but was ordered to due to certain talents of his. Sarutobi sighed and then took another hit of his cancer pot, his pipe. He thought for a few seconds more before he nodded his head in agreement with himself. "I see all of your teams as acceptable according to the current scores of the genin, but we must wait for Iruka before we finalize this," he replied to them, and so they waited. Not 5 minutes later, Iruka walked through the door with the test results. He held them up and, with a nod from Sarutobi, began to rattle off the scores. All of the civilians, minus Sakura, passed barely but would be weeded out with the real genin exams. Shikamaru Nara, 60.1% overall, pass. Choji Akamichi 62.8% overall, pass. Kiba Inuzuka 68.5% overall, pass. Ino Yamanaka 73% overall, pass. Sakura Haruno, 73.2% overall, pass. Hinata Hyuga 89.3% overall, pass. Sasuke Uchiha 98.4% overall, pass. And Naruto Uzumaki, 100% overall, pass. The Junins were quiet until Kurenai spoke quietly. "What was Uzumaki's score again?" she said. Iruka smirked. "A 100% perfect score, Kurenai-san. Naruto seems to have progressed immensely," he replied. The Sandaime furrowed his brows and sighed. "Thank you, Iruka. Would you like to stay for team placements and, perhaps, offer some insight into who would work well together?" he said. Iruka nodded and replied, "Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka would not work well together, same with Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha. Choji Akamichi and Shikamaru Nara would work well with any of the other students, as would Hinata Hyuga. Kiba Inuzuka is a bit brash, but he is loyal to a fault. Shino Aburame would work well with any logical teams. Other than that, I have no suggestions, Hokage-sama." Sarutobi nodded. "Good. In that case," he looked to the Junins, "your requests are being mostly altered. You will be given teams that could work well together," he said. The Junins did not look happy but held their tongues out of respect for the old Hokage. Before I forget," he snapped his fingers and an Anbu stood next to him. "Please bring me Naruto Uzumaki," he will likely be at Ichiraku Ramen. The Anbu bowed and disappeared. He looked back to the Junins. Now, Team 7, led by Kakashi Hatake, will be Sasuke Uchiha, Choji Akamichi, and Kiba Inuzuka. Team 8, led by Kurenai Yuhi, will be Sakura Haruno, Hinata Hyuga, and Shikamaru Nara. He said, getting surprised looks from many. Kakashi was a bit surprised but noticed the hard hitters, Hunter team he was given and shrugged as it suited his style. Kurenai, on the other hand, was a bit perturbed and spoke up. Hokage-sama, what am I supposed to do with that team? She asked. Sarutobi sighed again. Kurenai, Hinata has the Byukugan, Shikamaru is actually a genius, as are all Nara, with a shadow bind, and Sakura is supposedly ripe for a genjutsu mistress. Tell me, what could they excel in? He asked. Kurenai thought for a moment before bowing her head. I apologize, Hokage-sama. They could be a perfect ambush team, they could do well with infiltration as well, if their planning and stealth abilities work out. She replied. The Sandaime waved off the apology and said, now, since that's cleared up, Team 10, led by Yamato, will be Naruto Uzumaki, Shino Aburame, and Ino Yamanaka. Yamato, a man who was very stoic, sighed as he guessed this was going to happen. He knew why he and Shino were being placed on Naruto's team, and he was pretty sure that Ino was being placed because she was an expert in the human pH psych, as was all of her clan, so she would notice quirks about Naruto that may escape even shinobi. Hi, Hokage-sama, he said. Once the teams were announced, the Anbu showed back up with Naruto, who smiled brightly at Sarutobi. Hey Oji-san, did you like the show? He asked. Sarutobi chuckled and replied, it was most entertaining, Naruto. I hope you will tell me how you did it. Naruto grew serious and stared the Hokage straight in the eye. When you come clean, I'll come clean. He countered. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees and several of the Junins began to grow nervous and tensed, getting ready for a battle. Naruto sighed and the tense atmosphere lessened. So, you gonna start grilling me or gonna ask Ibiki-san to do that for you? He asked almost jokingly. Sarutobi laughed. No number. Still, I am curious as to how you kept hidden all this time and how you knew Mizuki was up to something. He replied. Naruto sighed before he sat down in the chair in front of the Hokage's desk and kicked up his feet. People hate me, Oji-san. If I showed what I could really do, even with sabotage in the academy, then people would get more violent or even get the council involved. I'm not stupid, Oji-san, I can tell that people fear me, although I don't know why. As for Mizuki, well, he's been eyeing me like Orochimaru would when he gets a new little but buddy. He said. That threw even the Kami no Shinobi for a loop. Still the Sandaime chuckled before he grew serious. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. People are ignorant and can't see what they're missing. Mizuki is being tailed by Anko as we speak, so thank you for the tip, he replied. Naruto nodded. Yeah, whatever, don't apologize for them, Oji-san. So, who's my Junin sensei when I pass the real Genin test? He asked. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. So you knew about that too. He sighed and looked into the crowd, secretly looking to Yamato, who nodded his head and stepped forward. This is Yamato, he recently quit Anbu and wanted to become a Junin sensei. He said. Yamato nodded to Naruto, who nodded back and said, you seem level-headed. It'll be a pleasure working with you. If that's all, Oji-san, I'm gonna go celebrate some more. Sarutobi nodded and Naruto shocked them once again as he shunshined away in a flash of dark black powder that was swept out of the window. The Sandaime looked sadly at where the boy once sat. No child should have to hide their abilities in fear of being persecuted even more. He sighed and dismissed the Junin, who all left their old leader to his paperwork. Time skip. That night, Mizuki chuckled as he leapt through the rooftops with the forbidden scroll in his hands. He chuckled mentally. Even though he couldn't pin it on the Kyuubi brat, he would be able to hide out with Orochimaru-sama supporting him. He burst through the treeline and landed on a branch, which he immediately abandoned as it blew up the second his foot left the branch. He landed in a clearing and immediately started to scan his surroundings. Suddenly, a kunai came out of the brush and scratched his cheek. Mizuki's eyes widened as he realized just who was chasing him. Anko-san, I'm taking this scroll back to your master, why would you stop me? Mizuki asked. Never let it be said that Mizuki was a good judge of character. Anko burst out of the bushes with a fire in her eyes. That bastard was never my master. She roared as she advanced on an unsuspecting Chunin. Warning. The scene of torture and removal of manly parts was so gruesome that the author has censored it for the viewer's sanity. Thank you. Anko skipped happily into the Hokage's office as the Anbu dragged away a mutilated, yet still alive, Mizuki. She smirked at the Hokage and said, "Mission accomplished." Tsuruboy smiled. "Good work, Anko-san. I'll have Ibiki take care of him." He replied. Anko smiled again and said, "Well, if that's all, I'll be going then." She turned around to leave when Sarutobi spoke again. "Just a moment, Anko-san," he said. She turned around and he motioned to the chair in front of his desk. She took it quietly, a little curious as to what he needed to speak with her about so late in the night. "I would like for you to tell me everything you believe Naruto-kun is capable of," he said seriously. Anko frowned. "Just ask him yourself. I don't keep that close a watch on him. I simply knew that the boy couldn't be the dead last they say he is if he could outrun and hide from Anbu like that," she replied. Sarutobi matched Anko's frown. "Please don't lie to me. I can tell that you know more than you're letting on," he countered. Anko sighed and glared at the Hokage. "I won't betray his trust willingly, Hokage-sama. I can tell you, he's probably about Chunin level right now. Other than that, I won't elaborate without his permission," she replied, hoping to satisfy the Hokage and Naruto. Sarutobi stared at the kunoichi for a moment before sighing and nodding in acceptance. "Fine, I have kept a secret from him long enough, I guess he can keep his for a little while," he told her. Anko glared again. "And when do you plan to tell him about his burden? It's obvious he doesn't trust you now, so why not tell him the reason why he's hated? All you do by keeping it from him is hurt him more," she said. Sarutobi glared back and caused Anko to back off. "He will be told when it becomes necessary and not a moment before. He needs to have as normal a life as possible before he is saddled with that responsibility," he replied. Anko sighed and looked at the Hokage. "He's never had a normal life and you know it. Still, I won't press the issue as it isn't my place. I won't tell him anything either, but I still stand by what I said earlier," she said before walking out of the office. Sarutobi took a long draft from his pipe and sighed. She has a point, but the boy must be loyal to the village before he learns of his burden, he thought as he headed home for the night. Next day, Naruto's apartment. Naruto smirked as he woke up and did his morning routine. Today was the day he showed just how strong he was. He did one last check over his body when he noticed something in the mirror. He took a closer look before his eyes narrowed intensely. There was a complex seal on his back. As quickly as he noticed it, it started to fade away. "Oh number you don't," Naruto said loudly as he summoned a few stasis seals from the seal on his arm and slapped them on each of his shoulders and right above his waist, box formation on his back. He glared at his reflection as he tried to get a clear view of it, but was severely hampered because he had only one mirror. He sighed and thought for a second before snapping his fingers as he figured it out. He quickly unsealed a few more stasis seals and some ice seals he had made. He activated the ice seals and formed a sheet of ice that reached from the ceiling to the floor and quickly slapped the stasis seals on. He took a kunai and carved a smooth surface on the ice and smiled at his handiwork. He grabbed a small stool nearby, that was usually used when he washed his back, and proceeded to examine the seal. It took him a good half hour to decipher it, but was pissed beyond belief at what he found. It was complex, all right. It held a loyalty seal, ensuring that any traitorous thoughts would be correctly steered into nothingness, A seal not unlike the caged bird seal that would allow the user to kill him should he ever decide to betray the village or if someone felt he got out of control. And last, but not least, a summoning seal, like the ones usually used in the Chunin exams, with the kanji for root on it. Naruto was livid. How could Oji-san do this to him? How could the kind old man put a seal that could potentially be used to kill him if the haters in the village found it? How could? Mental tire screech. That's not Oji-san's style at all. Naruto thought, destroying his previous train of thought. He took a closer look at the seal once again and noticed the root symbol connected with the summoning seal. Root. There's no organization like that in Konoha. Naruto thought. He was about to continue when he noticed the time and a knock on his door. He had about an hour to get ready for the academy and he had a sneaking suspicion as to who was at the door. He sighed and pulled on some baggy black cargo pants before he answered the door. Enko stood in the doorway with a dango stick in her hand and smirked at her master's attire. Trying to show off to me, Ruto-kun. How sweet, she said sweetly. Naruto rolled his eyes and let her come in. She noticed the giant seal on his back but ignored it considering who he was. Whatever you say, hubby Haim. Naruto replied with a smirk as he went towards his bedroom. Enko's smile just got wider. So I'm a princess now, huh? You sure know how to compliment a girl, Ruto-kun. She countered. Naruto stepped into his doorway and turned his head to look at her. Sure you are. Only princesses could get away with child molestation and not getting punished. He replied before he disappeared into his room. Enko went red-faced. She knew he wasn't old enough for adult matters, but his maturity often blinded her to the fact that he was supposed to be a 12-year-old boy. She took a seat on the busted-up couch and picked off another dango from her stick. Naruto emerged about 5 minutes later with black shinobi sandals, his black cargo pants, a tight black muscle shirt and a black trenchcoat with golden flames ing the bottom and the edges of his sleeves. On the back of the coat, the kanji for defense was emblazoned in gold. All in all, he struck an imposing figure considering he had sculpted muscles all over his body. Enko whistled in appreciation. Nice, Naruto-kun. You look good, she commented. Naruto smirked. Thanks, Enko-chan. He thought for a second before adding, say, is there an organization called Root in this village? He asked. Enko's face turned grave. Naruto, how do you know about them? She asked seriously. Naruto sighed and proceeded to explain the seal he found. When he reached the part about the summoning seal, Enko started swearing profusely. She eventually calmed down enough to respond. Root is a secret organization founded by Danzo Shimura during the Third Shinobi War. It was supposedly disbanded, but everyone knows he is still running it off the books, with secret political backings. He almost always opposes the Hokage in his choices concerning you, and he believes every shinobi is a weapon, the best being an emotionless one. She answered him. Naruto frowned deeply. It seems me and the old man have something to discuss. I don't want to trust him, but if what you said is true, I don't want to be associated with Danzo at all, he said. Enko nodded. Good choice, Naruto-kun. She looked at the clock and chuckled. You may wanna hurry, you're supposed to be getting your team in 3 minutes. She told him. Naruto glanced at the clock. Shit. Gotta go, bye, he said loudly before he shunshined to the academy. Enko chuckled and shut his door before heading out to the interrogation department. Academy. Classroom. The newly minted genin were sitting happily chatting about their soon-to-be exciting lives. Someone forgot to tell them the horror of D ranks. Naruto arrived exactly 1 minute before the bell would ring. He walked through the door and many people stopped and stared at the so-called dobi of the class. Many were surprised, and Sasuke, being the emo brooder that he is, said, even if you change your clothes, you're still a dobi. Naruto looked at him blankly before he simply headed up the stairs and sat next to Shino. He was saved from any further comments because Iruka walked in. Naruto kicked back and relaxed as Iruka started on a speech about the duties and privileges of being a genin of Konohagakure. He noticed a bug crawling across his desk and smiled softly. He put his finger next to the bug and allowed it to climb on. He looked to Shino, who nodded, and the bug flew back to the boy. Naruto smirked and perked up as Iruka started to call out the teams. Team 1. Team 7 Sasuke Uchiha, Kiba Inuzuka, and Choji Akamichi, led by Junin Kakashi Hatake. This earned several loud wails from the girls in the room. Sakura was ready to stand up and yell and scream till she got her way, until Naruto blasted her with enough ki to make her go rigid for a while. Iruka noticed but simply shrugged it off, having been informed by the Sandaime about Naruto's change. Team 8 Sakura Haruno, Hinata Hyuga, and Shikamaru Nara, led by Junin Kurenai Yuhi. Sakura was quiet. Hinata was silently happy and sad, happy to get her sister figure as a teacher and sad to not have her love interest. Shikamaru simply muttered a troublesome under his breath and went to sleep. Naruto looked to Shino. They both seemed to come to the same conclusion. Team 9 is still active, so we go to Team 10 Naruto Uzumaki, Shino Aburame, and Ino Yamanaka, led by Junin Yamato. Iruka said finally. Ino's jaw was on the ground. She was stuck with the dead last and the bug boy. Shino and Naruto simply nodded to one another again and went back to being silent. Your Junin-sensei should be here soon, please wait patiently for them. Iruka said before he picked up the papers and headed out. Naruto simply turned to Shino and said, "It will be a pleasure working with you, Shino-san." Shino nodded and replied, "Likewise, Naruto-san. I have yet to thank you for that new queen of mine." Naruto frowned slightly. "If you wish to thank me, meet me after our team meeting for a private talk," he said. Shino nodded and they silently waited for their third member or their sensei to introduce themselves. 5 minutes later, 2 people walked in. Yamato is the Mokuden user for those who have trouble placing him. "Team 8 with me," said the raven-haired beauty. The members of Team 8 silently rose and went after her. "Team 10, please follow me to the roof," the emotionally challenged man said. The members of Team 10 quietly shuffled out to the roof. They spread out and Yamato spoke up. "All right, I am Yamato. My likes include plants, my friends, my village, and sushi. My dislikes are traitors, snakes, experiments, and genjutsu. My hobby is gardening and I don't have a dream for the future I'm willing to share. My abilities include Mokuden techniques and a mixture of water and earth style ninjutsu. Please introduce yourselves in the same manner," he said before pointing at Ino. Ino sighed and said, "Ino Yamanaka. My likes are plants, my family, purple and ribs. My dislikes are bigots, rapists and perverts. My hobby is gardening as well and my dream for the future is to be a strong clan head for the Yamanaka clan. My abilities are my clan jutsu, which allows me to take over a person's mind." They all nodded, although they were surprised about the lack of Sasuke-kun in that introduction. Yamato pointed to Shino next. Shino nodded and continued, "I am Shino Aburame. My likes are my family, friends and bugs. My dislikes are hypocrites, bug haters, pesticides, and traitors. My hobbies include communing with my hive minds and discovering new types of bugs. My dream for the future is to have more hives than my father and to be a strong clan head. My abilities are my bugs which eat chakra or flesh to live." His teammates nodded and everyone looked to Naruto. Naruto nodded as well and said, "I am Naruto Uzumaki. My likes are my friends, seals, and ninjutsu. My dislikes are genjutsu, traitors, rapists, most of the civilian populace and perverts. My hobbies are training, reading and gardening, somewhat. My dream for the future. I honestly don't trust you enough to share that. My abilities include a personalized taijutsu style and the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. I won't reveal more, sorry." That earned a frown from Ino and stoic faces from Shino and Yamato. How can he not trust his teammates? Ino thought, slightly offended. His abuse must have been more than I thought, and I wonder if I have to worry about his interest in seals. Yamato thought. It would be logical to assume that he has trust issues given his situation in the village. Shino thought as he remembered the few times he had seen Naruto outside of the academy, and the glares and hate he received for an unknown, and therefore illogical, reason. Yamato nodded. Very well. I wish to ask you all a question. There is no right or wrong answer, simply answer in your honest opinion, he said, gaining the attention of the genin. If you were given a test where you had to get a bell from your teacher by noon in order to become a genin, and there were only 2 bells, what would you do? He asked. Naruto thought for a moment before he looked to his teammates and motioned them to come closer. Shino immediately closed the distance and Ino, although reluctantly, quietly followed suit. They began to whisper quietly, and Yamato decided to let them give him a plan so he could test their planning skills, seeing as they already passed the teamwork test he had planned to give. They all nodded and Naruto stepped forward. We would work together to get the bells and then tell the sensei that he had to pass all of us or none of us because there has never been a 2-genin team in Konoha, barring off-duty rosters when a teammate dies. Naruto answered. Yamato chuckled. Very well, you pass. Tomorrow we will meet at Training Ground 10 for our first training as a team. Please be there at 8 a.m. and be prepared to work. He said before he disappeared in a shunshin. Ino quickly made her way to the stairs and out of the building. She had nothing to speak to her teammates about. Shino turned to Naruto, who smirked at him and said, Now Shino-kun, we have much to discuss, you and I. Naruto put his hand on Shino's shoulder and they disappeared in a shunshin. They reappeared inside of a spare room in Naruto's lab. Shino took a moment and looked around. It was a simple room, no bigger than your average bedroom, with a table, 2 chairs, and 2 cups of tea waiting on the table. Shino's eyebrow rose in curiosity and Naruto answered his unasked question, I sent a clone to create the tea. Hope you don't mind, but I thought we could be comfortable whilst we talk. Naruto said as he motioned Shino to a seat. Shino nodded and sat down, followed by Naruto. Before we get down to the serious stuff, how's your hive doing? Naruto asked. Shino was slightly surprised but answered anyways, they grow steadily every day. I have 3 hives currently. 2 of the regular Kikaichu and 1 of the special bug that was created when it met you. Naruto smirked and Shino took that as a signal. Naruto-san, why is it that the companion that I sent with you for a week is now able to feed on Yuki and consumes only a quarter of what my other companions eat? He asked, curious. Naruto chuckled. That leads into why you are here. But first, I must ask you. What do you think of me? Naruto asked seriously. Shino sat quiet for a moment before responding. I believe you have hidden much of your skills, especially after today's performance, and you are, more than likely, the strongest genin at this time. Your previous behavior was, apparently, a mask set to hide yourself from something. Perhaps the treatment you received by the villagers. Shino said. He noticed no reaction aside from the slight narrowing of Naruto's eyes but silently confirmed his observation. Overall, I find you to be a kind person with a penchant for pranks that could be a valuable ally and friend. Shino responded honestly. Naruto eyed Shino quietly. 5 minutes ticked by before Naruto replied to Shino's observation. I appreciate your honesty, and I would be honored to be your friend. Your observations are spot on and I must say that I am relieved to see that not everyone my age is blinded by their parents or their own preconceptions. One more question before I explain why I brought you here, if you would be so kind. Naruto asked. He received a nod from Shino before continuing. What do you think of the teams? He asked. Shino thought for a moment before answering. Team 7 would be an ideal assault and tracking team. Team 8 would be a good ambush and capture, or infiltration team. Our team is illogical. Ino-san is mismatched with our team. You, Naruto-san, and I would be a good tracking and assault as well. Given your capabilities, this team could possibly be an infiltration and retrieval team, but Ino-san would need heavy training and I would have to be trained specially as well, so it is illogical to assume that combination at this time. Ino-san has only her clan jutsu and her abilities do not suit our styles. Until we determine our affinities, I cannot logically comment on Yamato-sensei as I have not seen his abilities or his skills. Shino replied. Naruto nodded. I thought the same thing. Unfortunately, I know why this team was formed and, given your answers, I feel it prudent to answer your earlier question. Naruto said. At this, Shino seemed to lean a bit closer. The Kyuubi no Kitsune is a Biju and no human, no matter how powerful, can kill a Biju. However, a strong human can seal the Biju into a container. Naruto noticed Shino's eyebrows nearly disappear into his hair but continued on. The Yondaime Hokage did not kill the Kyuubi, as was told the younger generation, instead he sealed it inside a newborn child, because no Biju higher than Sanbi can be sealed into an inanimate object. He sealed it into me, Shino-san. Naruto said as he stared directly into Shino's eyes, air goggles. Shino was silent for a moment. Why would we be told he killed it then? He asked. Naruto sighed. You have noticed my treatment amongst the villagers. Imagine if the younger generation believed the same as the older. That I was the fox reincarnated. I would be dead, not that they haven't tried it already. Naruto answered. This answers your earlier question. Your Kikaichu can feed on Yuki because my chakra contains a low amount of Yuki. I steadily fed it enough, in a small amount, that it mutated and can consume Yuki. I hope you find it useful. Naruto answered. Shino furrowed his eyebrows. Why would you give me a weapon against yourself? Why would you give a potential enemy a weapon to kill you? Shino asked as he remembered the trust issues Naruto had. Naruto was silent for a moment before responding. I believe you are the best person to stop me should the need arise. You hold no prejudice for me being the container, as you yourself hold Kikaichu. You are taught to think logically before acting. You would also factor in that I allowed you to have these companions and act accordingly. Simply put, Shino-san, I have watched many of our classmates, and other ninja that protected me when I was younger, and believe that you are the best suited to control me, should the need arise. Naruto replied. Shino silently went over Naruto's reasons before bowing his head. I am deeply honored to know that you would trust me so easily, Naruto-san. He said. Naruto sighed. I don't trust you completely, Shino-san, but I do believe in your decisions regarding my tenant. Naruto answered, getting a nod of agreement from Shino. Now, this team has a Mokuden user, which the first is rumored to have been able to control a Biju with his abilities. A Yamanaka who could tell if I was thinking of leaving or being disloyal to the village, even if it's subconsciously. And, you, who can eat my chakra and my Yuki. This team was made solely to control me and I find it extremely hard to work with them, let alone trust them, when their job is to keep me in line. Naruto said, answering the question of why he didn't trust his team. Shino nodded. It is logical, considering your situation. However, I understand what you mean. I appreciate you telling me all of this, Naruto-san. Shino said as he noticed the time. Naruto nodded. It is fine, please don't tell anyone that I know. I have one last thing I need to take care of before all of this comes out. Naruto said as he thought of the seal that was still being displayed on his back via his stasis seals. Shino nodded and replied, I shall honor your wish, Naruto-san. I hope you can come to trust me more. He bowed as Naruto put his hand on his shoulder. Naruto smiled softly. We shall see, Shino-san. He replied as he shunshined the two back to the training field before they parted ways. Naruto to his shithole apartment and Shino to his complex. Naruto walked silently back to his apartment as he thought back on his meeting with Shino. Suddenly, he remembered making the tea and setting the table for the meeting. Wait a second, I didn't do that. That was my clone. So I get the memories of my clones. Why didn't I notice this before? He thought. He shrugged a minute later and chuckled, oh well, I'll just have to use this later. He walked up to his door and channeled chakra into the seal he had woven into the doorknob. It unlocked with a soft click, and he stepped inside. He made his way to his room as he heard the door lock behind him and the seal glow around the room before fading. He stepped inside and smirked, seeing a sleeping Anko in his bed. She's so clingy, he thought before quickly stepping to his underwear, hopping into bed, and snuggling with his girl. But whoever said I didn't like it? Naruto thought as Anko's arms wrapped around him and pulled him flush against her body. He chuckled softly before falling asleep. Same night. Aburame compound. Shino walked into the compound at 8 p.m. He hadn't had dinner and walked straight to the kitchen so he could find something to eat. He walked in and was surprised to find his father sitting at the table with a cup of tea. Shibi was a good 5 feet 10 inches with a long black trenchcoat covering his body and the trademarked goggles all Aburame wore. He looked up to see Shino walked in and allowed his son to make his dinner and sit before beginning his conversation. You are late, Sochi. That is unlike you. May I inquire as to your whereabouts? Shibi asked. I was with one of my teammates San. Shino replied before he bit into the sandwich he had made. Shibi sat silently before replied, I see. Would it, perhaps, be Uzumaki-san that you were with? Shino nodded. Yes, San. He answered my question as to my new hive. It was most informative. He said. Shibi's eyebrows rose. What did he tell you? He asked curiously. Shino put down his sandwich and looked at his father. I am afraid that I have promised Naruto-san not to reveal his secrets until he chooses to do so himself. Suffice it to say that he chose to give me my hive and that it was not an accident. Please refrain from informing anyone of your suspicions, for I believe that Naruto-san has earned his privacy. Shino replied seriously. Shibi stared at his son for a moment before nodding. I will do as you ask, Sochi. However, if things get out of hand, I will have to inform the Hokage. He said. Shino nodded in agreement. I understand San. I will simply have to ensure that things do not get out of hand. Shino said. Shibi smiled behind his trenchcoat and stood. I will leave that task to you then, Sochi. Good night, he said before leaving the room. Shino bowed his head in respect and replied, Thank you San. Good night. Time skip. 1 week. Naruto's lab. The last week had gone rather well. Yamato had taught them tree walking and they had all got it down in 3 days. Naruto already had it mastered but made it look like he was working on it. He didn't want anyone to know his true strength until he removed that bloody seal from his back. Ino was, surprisingly, only a fangirl because she thought it would help Sakura to have a rival. That plan backfired and Ino was now working hard to gain some real kunoichi skills. She didn't seem to pay much attention to Naruto but had commented that her dad often asked about her team. Yamato was pleasantly civil to Naruto, much to his surprise. He taught all of the genin equally and actually seemed to enjoy it. He had shown a few of his Mokuden jutsus, like his Moku Bunshin and his Mokuten, Mokujoheiki, wood release, wood locking wall, which had seemed pretty useful in a fight. He did seem to watch Naruto the most, but he knew that old man Hokage had ordered it, along with severe political threats, so as to ensure that Naruto wasn't under Hikari's influence. It still made him laugh when he thought about their irrational fear of a woman that loved him. Shino was coming to be Naruto's best friend and they could often be seen working together during their D-rank missions. Shibi and Shino had both kept their word and had not informed anyone of Naruto's secret, not that Shibi knew much, and Naruto was happy to see he could trust someone with his secrets after so long. He really didn't like hiding everything but it was necessary for now. Currently, Naruto was working on the seal that was on his back. He had made liberal use of Kage Bunshin and had several teams studying the separate parts of the seal. He himself was looking at the loyalty seal and couldn't decide between praising the man who made this, or throwing him into the deepest pits of hell. He was leaning toward the latter. Either this guy was a seal master of the highest caliber and is hiding seals that I can't see, or he just didn't give a rat's about the target of this seal. If I even try to remove this thing, there's a good chance I'll fry my brain. Naruto said in frustration. Suddenly he found his head in between two fleshy globes and a sweet lilting voice flowing into his ears. Calm yourself, Naruto-kun, a woman said. Naruto took a deep breath and smiled softly. Good. Now, guess who? She said, smirking behind him as she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. Naruto chuckled. I'm gonna guise. Hikari-chan. He said childishly. Hikari laughed as she stepped back and twirled when he spun around in his chair. She winked at him and giggled. Good guess. How did you know? She asked, mock pouting. Naruto simply smiled. Anko-chan is on a mission for this week, so it had to be you. Besides, you were due back about 3 days ago. He replied as he gave her a look that said, start explaining. Hikari chuckled nervously and said, sorry about that. She turned to the hallway. Oi, Ami-chan, get in here. She yelled into the hallway. Naruto's sweat dropped as a woman stepped into the room. She had long silvery white hair that reached her rump. Bright electric blue eyes and a body most women would kill for. She was a good DD size, like Hikari. Her waist was slim but her was large and plump, perfect for Ing, not that Naruto thought that, yet. Her legs were slender but obviously held muscle by the way she walked. She had on a light blue yukata with simple sandals and she smiled warmly at Naruto. Hello Naruto-san, it is good to meet you. She said formally. Naruto sat silently before turning and glaring at Hikari. Who said you could bring someone here? He asked, angry that one of the only people he trusted just willingly gave away his hideaway. Hikari visibly shrank back. Ami-chan has been my friend for centuries, Naruto-kun. Besides, she's only here because you have an interest in Oropedo. She said, saddened by his anger. Naruto sighed and looked back at the woman. I apologize for being so rude, but I have trouble trusting people and I don't know you one bit. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. May I ask what your is? I assume it's not Ami-chan. Naruto said with a slight smirk. The woman had a tick on her forehead for being called that but sighed and nodded. My name is Amaterasu. Naruto looked at her curiously until she rolled her eyes and smiled. Yes, I am the goddess of the sun. I know you may be skeptical, but consider who I came with. She said. Naruto looked over at Hikari, who was still rather sad that Naruto had gotten upset with her, and then chuckled. Good point. Amaterasu-sama, may I inquire as to your reason for being here? Hikari-chan said you were here because of Oropedo, but why? He asked curiously. Amaterasu sighed and motioned to the table. Naruto nodded and the human, demon and god sat down. Naruto sent a Kage Bunshin to get some tea and Amaterasu spoke. Orochimaru is actually the reincarnation of the 8-headed snake Yamada no Orochi. He seeks to regain his immortality and tear down the Kami's realms. Unfortunately, Kamis cannot directly interfere in mortals' affairs until a sure threat has been recognized. As it is, he holds only a bastardized version of immortality and nowhere near enough power to tear down the heavens. However, every Kami is allowed certain privileges. He holds the Kusanagi, which is actually my blade. I am allowed, by Kami law, to retrieve it from him. She said. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement. Hikari had briefed him on several celestial and demonic disputes in case they ever affected him through her. Naruto's clone had returned and set down 3 sets of tea for the people. Naruto noted that Hikari still looked sad and sighed. He leaned over and tapped her shoulder. She turned and found herself on the receiving end of a rather heated kiss. They broke apart slightly flushed and breathing hard. Naruto smirked. Next time just tell me you're bringing friends over. And quit being sad, it just doesn't suit you. Naruto said. Hikari smiled and nodded as a blushing Amaterasu cleared her throat. The 2 future mates blushed and Amaterasu chuckled. Good to see you two so happy. In any case, I need assistance in finding and fighting Orochimaru, so I was wondering if we could join forces, so to speak. I know you want to hunt him down for what he did to Anko-san. What do you say? She asked. Naruto looked to Hikari, who nodded. I think this would be a mutually beneficial thing, so yes. Your assistance would be most helpful. Naruto said as they shook hands. I would like to inform you that there's no way I can fight Orochimaru at my current level. Amaterasu nodded. I know that, but we have time to fix it. Besides, we need to find him first. I have a feeling that he will come after this village because it stands for everything he hates and it's the place that denied him power as Hokage. She said. Hikari nodded in agreement. Right, he's awfully conceited that way. She turned to Naruto. We should up your training and try to find out how to do elemental manipulation. Naruto nodded. That's a good idea. However, this seal I'm working on comes first, he said. The two females looked at him curiously until he sighed and explained the seal to them. Needless to say, they were both pissed. Hikari was even a little mad at herself for not noticing it. Amaterasu was livid that they could so callously treat another human this way. Naruto shook his head when they both commented on destroying something. We mustn't stoop to their level, girls. I will prove them wrong about me, but, even if I can't, I'll still protect those precious to me and say damn those who believe me to be a demon. Naruto said. Hikari and Amaterasu smiled. Now let's get to work on this seal. Amaterasu, if you have any knowledge, it'd be much appreciated. If not, then please make yourself at home. Naruto said. Luckily, Amaterasu had some knowledge in seals and another view was always welcome. Time skip. 3 days. Girls' night out. Anko had returned from her mission yesterday and had met the new female now residing at Naruto's hideaway. Naruto had given her 3 special seal tags that she had asked for and she patted her trenchcoat pocket happily. It had taken him most of the week to supply the chakra to them, but he was happy to help her out. He had also told her that she could reveal her curse mark removal, but to keep just WHO did it until he removed that pesky seal from his back. Anko smiled seeing the girls all sitting at a corner table and promptly ran over and joined them, discreetly slipping a genjutsu and sound disruption seal onto the booth. Naruto really is useful with those things. She thought happily as she took her seat next to Kurenai. Hello girls, she said cheerily. Hana smiled at her. Hey Anko. How's it going? She asked. Anko smiled brightly. Great, why do ya ask? She replied. Hana shrugged. You just seem happier than usual. She said. Anko chuckled. There's a reason for that, but first, what were you girls talking about? She asked. Yugao sighed. Those anti-rape seals that have been going around recently. We can't seem to get our hands on some. She said sadly. Kurenai nodded. They only seem to sell them to the kunoichi who are sent specifically into seduction. That's not even mentioning the price. She said. Anko nodded her head as well but thought, well of course. Naruto-kun made sure that those girls got them first so that they could protect themselves. After all, it was child's play for him to get the list of girls from the administration building. Talk about low security, although, he can hide from Anbu. Hana shook her head. I just wish we could get each a one. You never know when they could come in handy. She added. Meanwhile, Higurashi shop. Naruto performed his version of the henge, the actual transformation because he pours enough chakra into it, and walked inside. He was a tall man at 6 feet 8 inches with a long black trenchcoat, sunglasses, a face mask, and a hat. He tipped his hat to Tenten who nodded and made his way to the back. He smiled seeing Hiroshi working the forge. Hiroshi looked up and smiled at one of his best sources of income. Ah Tatsumaki-san. It's good to see you. Those anti-rape seals are genius. They sell extremely well, he said smiling. Tatsumaki raised an eyebrow. How much have you been selling them for? He asked. Hiroshi smiled. You sold them to me for $50, but the demand was so big after the first batch that they have been going for about $200, $300 per seal. We are making a huge profit. He said happily. I don't know the Ryu conversion, so sorry guys. If someone could help me out, I'd be grateful. Now Hiroshi was no bad guy, but he was a businessman and Naruto understood that. However, these seals were special. They were for preventing something that Naruto utterly despised and he was not happy with the price of his invention. Tatsumaki glared at Hiroshi through his glasses. Hiroshi visibly shrank because if he lost this resource he would lose a very large portion of his business. You mean to tell me that my anti-rape seal is becoming inaccessible to the very people that it was made to protect? He asked angrily. Hiroshi frowned. Most can still afford it, but your demands have been met. All of the girls in seduction and infiltration have received at least two, at discounted prices. I just didn't think that the price would be driven so high. He replied. Hiroshi may have been a large man, and a retired chunin, but he knew that seals masters were very rare and very powerful. Tatsumaki sighed. Very well. Drop the price to $75 minus $100 per. You still turn a profit and it becomes affordable to all kunoichi, aside from genin, because they have no real need for it. If they do, well, they will have to save. It takes too much time and energy to make them for any less, he said, and Hiroshi nodded. Tatsumaki smiled behind his mask. Now, I have something you may be interested in. Hiroshi's eyes sparkled. Whenever Tatsumaki showed him something new, he was always assured something interesting. I know your daughter is a weapons mistress. Well, imagine if she could put a seal on her enemy that gave him a magnetic charge. He said. Hiroshi smiled brightly and the gleam in his eye brightened as Tatsumaki pulled out a tag and stuck it on a nearby wall. Kai, he said as he focused chakra to it. Immediately, all the tools big enough to fly flew straight into the wall. Hiroshi's smile threatened to split his face. This way, even if the person dodges, they will probably get hit because of the magnetic field. What do you think? Tatsumaki asked. Hiroshi turned to Tatsumaki, with dollar signs in his eyes. How much and where do I sign? He asked, earning a chuckle from his partner. Back with the girls. Enko's hand reached into her pocket and pulled out 3 tags before slapping them in front of her friends. Kurenai picked one up and her jaw dropped. How did you get these? She asked, surprised. The other girls picked up their tags and surprise adorned their faces as well. Enko shrugged with a soft smile on her face. I know the guy who makes them. I'm afraid I can't tell you who yet, but I should be able to tell you in about a month if my guess is correct. She said. Hana stared at her incredulously. How do you know this guy? He's gotta be a seal master to make something so complex. She said. Enko's smile widened slightly and she pulled down her collar to show her curse mark, or rather her lack of curse mark. It's the same guy that removed this thing from me. The same guy that saved me from being raped. So you can understand why I'm not going to tell you. She said softly. What? Rang out across the table as the 3 girls sat stunned at what was just told to them. Enko, if what you say is true, then why doesn't he showcase his skills? He'd be heralded as a seals master. Kurenai said, shocked. Enko shook her head. I can't say. All I will say is that he will come out eventually, but he refuses to do so now because he would be in danger. She said. Hana nodded. All right. I say we drop this matter until Enko tells us because I don't want to lose her friendship or her trust. She stated. Enko looked at Hana and smiled. Thanks, Hana-chan. Hana simply nodded back and the girls agreed to keep it quiet until Enko told them otherwise. They spent the rest of the day in the spa, simply enjoying themselves. Enko waved goodbye to her friends as she made her way back to the hideout. Time warp. After Naruto left the Higurashi shop, Naruto had removed the henge, but bought some sunglasses that seemed to complete his look. He made his way back to his lab, after making sure no one was following him, and entered to find the groups of clones working with Hikari and Amaterasu to try and unravel the seal in a way so as to not destroy his brain. He sighed as he sat down at his desk and looked at the seal again. He'd been working on it nearly non-stop and he was honestly tired of it. Hikari stopped helping the clones and walked over to Naruto. She draped herself over the chair and wrapped her arms around him. What's wrong, Naruto? She asked. Naruto leaned back into her embrace and replied, I'm just tired of this seal. Hikari frowned. Then why don't you let your clones handle it and work on something else? It's not like the seal is going anywhere. She said. Naruto sighed. You're right, I just don't like the idea of anyone being able to control me like this. Naruto told her. Hikari nodded. I understand, but it seems that the seal also transmits a chakra signal to the user, probably Danzo. You could place a suppression seal on it, but he may notice it. She said. Naruto slumped in his chair before sighing again. You're right. I'll wait till I'm closer to unraveling this before I suppress it. I'll try and unlock that last seal on my arm instead. He said. Hikari smiled and turned Naruto's head to kiss him lightly. Good idea. Maybe we can figure out who that man is, nay. She said. Naruto nodded and got to work. Hikari smiled seeing Naruto focus fully again, without distractions, and went back to helping the clones. Amaterasu was watching and smiled seeing her longtime friend have such a good relationship with someone like Naruto. Hikari had told her almost everything she could about Naruto. Hikari knew that it was safe to do so simply because kamis did not interfere in the mortal realm, so she wouldn't give out anything. Besides, being friends for centuries helps too. Naruto spent the next 3 hours slowly applying chakra to the complex seal on his arm, trying to find the unlocking mechanism inside the array. He slowly pushed chakra through the various lines of the seal, searching for dead ends, traps, and false releases. It was much like a grid that had pieces and sections that were nothing but traps. Anko walked in just as a poof of smoke surrounded Naruto's arm and he yelled, Eureka! I got it. He looked up and smiled at the women, and clones, in the room, looking every bit the 12-year-old he was. The girls all smiled and Naruto turned back to the leather-bound research journal with a note taped onto the front. Naruto looked at it curiously until he picked it up and started to read. The girls came and quietly read it over his shoulder. Dear Naruto, I'm sorry. I know I said that earlier, but I feel the need to say it again. If you have reached this level, then know that I am proud to call you my son and my successor. In this journal are all my notes on the 2 jutsus that made me both famous and infamous in the Third Shinobi War. The Rasengan, and the Hiraishin, Flying Thunder God. Both are formidable justice and I hope you use them wisely. One last thing before I go, I love you, son, and I hope that you and your mother still love me as well. Naruto sat silent for a moment as the eyes bugged out of Anko's head. Suddenly, he started laughing hysterically. The girls all looked at him as he held the note. He turned towards Hikari, who was on his left, and crushed the note to his chest. Tears were streaming down his eyes. He slowly stopped laughing and started sobbing. The 3 girls quickly pulled him into a hug and Hikari whispered quiet comforts to her container. Nearly 10 minutes later, Naruto had stopped crying and was wiping the tears from her face. The girls let him go and he put the note back onto the journal. He stared quietly at it for a second before he turned his gaze to the girls. They were all quietly amazed at his sight. This was not the boy they had just comforted as he found his father's notes. This was the man that would master these jutsu and bring the world to its knees should they stand in his way. The 4th son, huh? Well, Naruto-kun, I can't say I'm surprised. You are carbon copy of him and you're a master of seals. Anko said with a smirk. Amaterasu and Hikari's eyebrows both disappeared into their hairlines. So, whatcha gonna do, Naruto-kun? With these jutsu, you could leave Konoha and go pretty much anywhere with assured backing from the hidden village you choose. She said. Naruto shook his head. No way. My 2-san gave his life for this village. Not the people in the village but the will of fire that he believed in. I believe that, and I will make these people honor his sacrifice, if I have to. Get ready, Konoha, because the Kuroi Senko, Yellow Flash, will rise again. Naruto said with conviction. He immediately sat down and began to study the notes for the Rasengan. The girls all smiled and Anko began to help him understand shape manipulation while the 2 immortals went back to helping the clones. Time skip. 2 weeks. Naruto stood in the forest of death smirking. He focused chakra to the palm of his right hand as his left spun over it. He dashed forward at Anbu speeds and slammed his palm into a large boulder while yelling, Rasengan. The boulder shattered into pieces as Naruto retracted his hand and noticed the damage. He smiled. It had taken him a week to learn the jutsu using his clones as a support to make it. Another week to make it with only his hands and in a 5-second interval. Now he needed to work on making it with one hand and making it in under 2 seconds. Anko whistled in appreciation as she noticed the craters from the various Rasengans that Naruto had made. Nice work, Naruto Koi, she said loudly as she landed in the clearing. Naruto turned to her and smiled brightly. Thanks, hubby Haim. He replied. Anko felt her face heat up slightly but smirked anyway and said, if you don't head back now, you're going to miss your team meeting. She told him. Naruto looked at the sun and yelped as he dashed off into the forest yelling, I'm gonna be late. Anko chuckled and shunshin to her apartment. She had just gotten back from a mission and was dead tired. Naruto hopped out of the trees and into the clearing that was training ground 10. He landed just in time to meet with his team without any complaints. Naruto scratched the back of his head and chuckled, sorry guys. He said as they all turned to him. Yamato simply smiled, it's fine Naruto. You aren't late but we have to hurry to get our mission for today. He said as he walked towards town and the Hokage office. The genin quickly followed their sensei and the group was soon standing in front of the Hokage. Yamato stepped forward and said, Team 10 reporting for their D-rank mission Hokage-sama. Sarutobi smiled warmly, Team 10. We only have one mission left for today and that's to paint Mrs. Hikurisega's fence. Will you accept this mission? He asked. Yamato nodded, yes Hokage-sama. He replied as he took the scroll. He turned to his team and said, Team 10 proceed to Mrs. Hikurisega's house and wait for me there. I have to speak with the Hokage about one of my previous assignments. His team nodded and walked out of the office although Naruto eyed him warily. Sarutobi looked at Yamato and activated a silencing seal. Report, he said. Yamato nodded, nothing new sir. He still doesn't trust me or Ino, although he does seem to have a friendship with Shino. He doesn't appear to have any friends inside the village aside from the ramen stand people, Shino, and you sir. The villagers still treat him like the plague even when he's with his team. I can honestly say that if he decided to leave, there isn't much stopping him. He said. Sarutobi sighed, thank you. Tell me though, do you believe him to be a threat to Konoha? He asked seriously. Yamato stood silent for a moment before answering. I do not believe he would attack Konoha outright sir. He said stoically. Sarutobi nodded, very well continue your observation. He said as he dismissed the sound seal and his ninja. Yamato shunshin to his team as the Sandaime picked up his tobacco pipe. Please Naruto. I have made many decisions for the greater good. I don't want to order your death. I don't want to make another mistake. He thought to himself as he resumed his work. Hikurisega's house. 9 a.m. Team 10 arrived at their destination and walked up to the door. Mrs. Hikurisega was a pleasantly plump old lady with several cats and a picket fence around her yard. She had several cans of white paint and brushes for the genin to use. When she saw Naruto, she sneered. However, she turned to Ino and Shino and said, why don't you two start on the work? I'll bring you a nice cup of lemonade out soon. She said sweetly. Ino quickly set to work, whilst Shino seemed to hesitate before Naruto nudged him quietly. Yamato shunshin to the location just as Mrs. Hikurisega turned to Naruto with a sneer on her face. You, little demon, are to work on the other side of the fences. I can't have you corrupting those poor children more than you have. She said as she thrust a brush and some paint into his hands. This was the scene that Yamato shunshined into. He frowned when she waved cheerily to him and noticed that Naruto did as she said, but his hands were gripping the paint and the brush rather tightly. Hello. I'm happy to see such bright and energetic faces working on my fence. She said to him. He nodded and she proceeded to ramble on about the two, who were working, before she walked inside to make some lemonade as she promised. Yamato was about to walk over to Naruto when Ino stopped painting next to him. Yamato-sensei, why does everyone treat Naruto so badly? His pranks weren't that bad. She said. She still hadn't caught on to her two San's gentle proddings about Naruto. Yamato sighed. All I can say is that they see him as something he's not for reasons out of his control. Don't dig too deep, you may not like what you find. He said seriously as Mrs. Hakurisega came out with 4 glasses of lemonade. She swiftly handed them out to the genin and their sensei before heading over to Naruto with the last one. She picked it up and drank it in front of him before heading back inside to do the dishes. She spent most of the morning torturing Naruto and Yamato grew sick of it. He tried to speak up but Naruto always seemed to comment about something else. He wondered about that as the mission came to a close and Mrs. Hakurisega handed out the mission payment but refused to pay Naruto. You didn't work at all, she said to him as she turned her back and started into the house. Yamato opened his mouth but Naruto simply chuckled and covered his sensei's mouth before the door slammed in their faces. Yamato turned and glared at Naruto saying, Naruto, I don't know why you kept me from saying something but you better have a good reason for stopping me from berating a civilian who was harassing a ninja, he said seriously. Naruto stared at him for a moment before he put his hands in his pockets and headed towards the Hokage tower. He shrugged and said, it won't change her mind so why bother? It'll take more than idle threats to make them realize they're wrong. Yamato closed his mouth and the team started to follow Naruto. They still had to turn in the mission report anyways. They walked into the Hokage office and Sarutobi smiled at them. Ah, Team 10. Glad to see you back, he said. Naruto stepped forward and said, Gigi, I request 2C rank lightning jutsu in reparation for my non-payment at the hands of one Mrs. Hakurisega. The people in the room stood shocked. Sarutobi cleared his throat. I'm afraid that's not possible, Naruto. If she refused to pay you, he said before Naruto interrupted him as he walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out the book on Konoha Charter. Naruto flipped through the pages and read aloud, if any ninja is denied payment by a civilian of Konoha, that ninja is allowed reparation in the form of nin, gen, tai, irio, or fuin jutsu scrolls from the Noha vault. 1D rank is equal to 2C rank, 1C rank is equal to 1B rank and 1C rank, 1B rank is equal to 1A rank and 1B rank, 1A rank is equal to 2A rank, 1S rank is equal to 1S rank. Naruto stated. The people on his team stood silently as Sarutobi eyed his surrogate grandson. Eventually, he sighed, very well. I will also be adding Mrs. Hakurisega to the black list. I am sorry, Naruto, he said. Naruto shrugged, I got a good deal out of it in my opinion. However, I will no longer take this abuse sitting down, Oji-san. Your methods have not worked, so I will resort to my own if it becomes necessary, he said seriously. Sarutobi took a hit of his pipe and nodded sadly. Good, thanks Oji-san. I'll take those scrolls when I come in tomorrow. Yane, he said as he shunshined away. The room was quiet until Shino spoke. Well, that was a well thought out reaction. Well done, Naruto-san, he said before returning to his compound. The other 3 occupants of the room just silently went their separate ways, except the Sandame who was hoping Naruto wouldn't go overboard. Time skip. 2 weeks, 4 weeks since discovery of seal. Naruto sat in his lab smiling. He had just cracked the seal that, he was now sure, Danzo had placed on him. The seal obviously didn't take into account the applicant's body or mind when used and it was just too inhumane for the fabled Sandame to use. Danzo was another matter entirely. He nodded as Hikari and Amaterasu congratulated him and helped him set up the sealing tags to destroy the seal and allow it to be seen. He got up and got dressed in his usual attire. He turned to Amaterasu and said, if myself or Hikari doesn't return in a day, destroy this place and leave. I don't want you to be hurt, alright? Amaterasu nodded. Very well, just don't get hurt, ya hear me? She said with a smirk. Naruto smirked back. Yeah, geez, you get more and more like Hikari every day, he said. Youch, he yelled as Hikari smacked him upside the head. What was that? She asked. Naruto chuckled. Nothing. Now will you go back to the seal? We have a grandpa to visit. Naruto said. Hikari nodded and disappeared. Amaterasu kissed him on the cheek, for good luck, and giggled as he disappeared into the air. It was gonna be one hell of a day. In a secret cave below Konoha, an old man with bandages over half his face and his right arm sat in his secret base, waiting for his root member to return with the information he ordered. He frowned as he thought of just why he had to spy on Naruto Uzumaki. After the announcement of a Jinchuriki being made, Sarutobi had vehemently denied Danzo access to the demon, and this had infuriated the old war hawk to no end. He had been able to apply a certain seal to the boy's back, with aid from Orochimaru of course. That was good news. The bad news: he had to watch as Konoha's most valuable tool was reduced to a blathering idiot in orange. The boy may be loyal, but he was as worthless as a blunt kunai. I mean, with him seeking attention everywhere, and the teachers sabotaging his performance, how could he be of any use? Then, he had the unique fortune of learning that Naruto was hiding his skills. Perhaps he wasn't as useless as Danzo originally thought. He had sent some root agents to tail him in his month of being a genin and was thoroughly surprised that he seemed to disappear at random times, and once with the Aburame heir. Finally, he had grown frustrated and simply ordered him to be tailed from his home in the mornings till they lost him and to wait at Ichiraku's ramen stand, the Hokage Tower, or his house. He had also ordered that the only Hyuga he had, to ensure that the seal was undamaged. He looked up just as he felt the telltale chakra signature of his spy. His spy looked like a regular Anbu, with a blank face mask, and promptly dropped to a knee. Report. Danzo said forcefully. The root member nodded and replied monotonously, Sir, Naruto Uzumaki was seen exiting one of the outerlying forests. As instructed, we had Rat use his Byakugan to ensure that the seal was still undetected. Unfortunately, Rat informed us that the seal is visible via 4 seal tags none of us have encountered before. Danzo's eye widened. How? No one but Jiraiya should have the skills to allow the seal to be shown, and he hasn't been to Konoha in 12 years. He asked, infuriated. The root member only spoke again. My apologies, sir. I do not know how, but Naruto Uzumaki was also headed for the Hokage Tower. Danzo started to sweat bullets. If Hiruzen sees that seal, then I'm going to have to blame someone else or destroy my whole operation. He thought. However, if the brat suddenly starts experiencing pain, then the old fool will probably take him to the hospital and I can take care of him before they find the seal. Danzo weighed a few other options before deciding that the aforementioned course was the best and proceeded to go to the Hokage Tower. He needed to be in range for the technique after all. He turned to the root agent and said, Prepare the doctors, they need to remove those seal tags. He said before exiting the cave. Hokage Tower. Same time. Naruto strode up to the doors and pushed them open. The last month had done him well. He could form a Rasengan in under 2 seconds, still working on making it instantly. The 2 jutsu scrolls he had obtained, Raiden, Raikyu Lightning Release, Lightning Ball, and Raiden, Kaminari Saji Lightning Release, Lightning Surge were usable, but he had yet to master them. His taijutsu was still about high chunin, but he could move faster than most junin, guy excluded. He was, obviously, a high-level sealmaster. His genjutsu was still non-existent, but Hikari and Amaterasu had made sure he could dispel about 90% of them. Naruto strode towards the stairs that lead to the Hokage's office. The secretary scowled at the boy and said, You. The Hokage is very busy, he doesn't have time to deal with someone like you. Naruto glared at her with some ki behind it and she visibly shrank from his gaze. Oji-san always makes time for me, and I have something important to tell him, so you better shut up and go back to work. He said coldly as he took to the secretary meekly went back to her work. She knew what the Sandame did to the last secretary to refuse Naruto entry. Naruto quickly ascended the stairs and kicked the Hokage's door open. Old man. We have something to talk about. Naruto said seriously as he closed the door behind him. Sarutobi had been having a rather nice day. The paperwork wasn't too bad, Jiraiya had shipped him an early release of the newest Ica Ica Paradise, and the council hadn't bothered him all day. He had sat back in his chair and taken a deep breath from the tobacco in his pipe when his doors were suddenly thrown open and Naruto striding in, demanding some kind of talk. Sarutobi put his pipe down and looked at Naruto. What exactly would that be, Naruto-kun? He asked. Naruto eyed him for a minute before turning around and slapping a seal on the door and muttering a quick, "Kai." The room glowed a bright blue for a second before it died down. That was a silencing, barrier, and genjutsu seal that will make anyone who listens in believe we are talking about my last D-rank mission. The old lady harassed me, so I thought it would be a good cover. Naruto explained. If Sarutobi had been holding his pipe, he would have dropped it. He stared at Naruto. How can you make a seal like that? He asked, shocked. Naruto shrugged. I've been studying seals for years now, Oji-san, but that's not why I came here, and let's keep on topic. Naruto replied. The Hokage was still trying to compose himself when Naruto rushed forward at his max speed, surprising the not yet recovered old man, and slapped a seal onto the Hokage's chest. It glowed blue with activation, and Naruto spoke before the Sandaime could ask, "That is a truth seal. Anything you speak must be the truth or it will change colors to red. A half-truth will appear as yellow, but I may allow those to slide depending on the question. You will answer my questions or I will leave this village," Naruto said seriously. Naruto stayed silent as Sarutobi thought over several scenarios in his head before glaring at Naruto. What makes you think you can come in here and order me around like this, Naruto? For that matter, why would you come here simply to ask questions? Ever since the Genin exams, I haven't been able to trust you, Naruto, and this is making it increasingly difficult to do so. He responded. Naruto glared back at the Hokage. I need answers, old man, and you're going to give them to me. You failed horribly at protecting me all my life. You. Oh. Me. Naruto said forcefully. Sarutobi looked visibly saddened by this. Naruto. Naruto interrupted him. You're wasting time, Oji-san. I don't want your apologies, nor your excuses. I want answers. He yelled as he slammed his hands down on the Hokage's desk. Sarutobi flinched and bowed his head. All right, what do you want to know? I can't answer some questions, but I will try to answer as many as I can, he replied sadly. Naruto nodded in satisfaction and said, How many seals are on my body? Sarutobi sighed. Only one. He replied. The seal glowed a bright blue, signifying truth. Suddenly his eyes went wide as he thought, if he's been studying seals, then he may know of the Kyuubi. Damn it, how am I gonna explain that? Naruto narrowed his eyes. Only the Shiki Fujin, correct? He said. Sarutobi's head whipped up and his eyes connected to Naruto's. You know? He asked, slightly fearful. Naruto nodded. Yes, again off subject, back to my question. He stated. Sarutobi's eyes seemed to get even sadder. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Naruto. As to your question, yes, only the Shiki Fujin. He replied sadly. Again, the seal glowed a bright blue. Naruto sighed happily and relaxed into the chair in front of the Hokage's desk. That's good news, Oji-san. I was afraid that you had ordered the extra seals and that I would have to take drastic measures, he said with a rather light tone. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes. What extra seals? He said seriously. Naruto looked at him and said, One last question and I guess I can answer that one. What was the seal on my jumpsuit for? Sarutobi sat silently, going over possible answers in his head. Before responding, it was a genjutsu seal designed to make your life easier. The seal glowed yellow, but Naruto already knew about the seal's true purpose, so he left it alone, for now. Naruto nodded. Very well. The extra seals. One was a seal to keep me from meeting Kyuubi. That broke about 2 years ago. Please hold all questions and comments until I'm done, Oji-san, Naruto said as he noticed Sarutobi opening his mouth and fear coming across his features. The second seal is really a conglomerate of 3 separate seals. I am currently counteracting the loyalty seal, but the other two are harder seeing as they aren't active and I really can't stop them from working without knowing their effects. Still, the conglomerate seal has a loyalty, mind destruction, and summoning seal all rolled into one. The loyalty was to Konoha, the mind destruction was probably stolen from the Hyugas, and the summoning summons shinobi from something called root. Naruto said, eyeing the Hokage. Sarutobi stiffened when Naruto mentioned root. The first seal didn't really affect Sarutobi too much, but the following two made him worry greatly. Only Danzo would be so bold as to put a seal like this on Naruto. Naruto noticed the Hokage stiffening and said, "You know root, don't you?" Sarutobi nodded and sighed. It's a, now defunct, branch of Anbu that was created in the Third War, and the Yondaime shut it down shortly after coming into office. Danzo Shimura was the head and I thought he was running underground but had no proof. He replied. The seal glowed blue once again and Naruto nodded his head. So what are you going to? Naruto never got to finish his sentence as pain erupted in his head. Naruto. Naruto. Hikari roared in his mindscape as she flooded his brain with her chakra to counteract the seal. Apparently, someone had decided that the mind destruction was best used right now. Sarutobi was instantly by Naruto's side as he grunted in pain while holding his head. Naruto. Naruto, what's wrong? He asked. Say seal. Activation. Ah. Use URK. Tags. Naruto said as he doubled over in pain. Sarutobi frowned and immediately started pulling off Naruto's clothes in an effort to find the seal. He pulled off Naruto's shirt so Naruto had only his pants and sandals on when he noticed the seal glowing angrily on his back. He quickly moved to the seal tags around the edges before noticing that they really didn't have anything that would help in the removal of the seal. He was no seals expert, but he could identify most seals. He rushed for Naruto's jacket and dug into the pocket before finding 3 seals. Each one had a kanji 1 it, summon, loyalty, and mind. The Sandaime quickly rushed back to Naruto and slapped the seals onto their corresponding areas and channeled chakra into the tags. He sighed in relief as he saw the seal become rigid and shatter, the ink flowing off of Naruto's back and onto the seal tags before bursting into flames and falling to the floor. Naruto's eyes rolled into the back of his head and he passed out from the sudden removal of pain. Sarutobi checked his pulse and noticed that it was strong and steady. He let out a breath he hadn't even known he was holding. He removed his fingers from the boy's pulse and took out a handkerchief. He wiped the sweat from Naruto's brow and smiled softly. You continue to amaze me. You're so much like your father, it's unreal. Suddenly his eyes hardened. Danzo has gone too far this time. He walked up to the seal on the door and ripped it off. He snapped his fingers and 2 Anbu appeared by his side. Summon the council and the Junin Corp. All Anbu are to assemble and report to the Hokage Tower immediately. Also, summon Anko Mitarashi to my office. As of now, I am declaring a state of martial law. No one gets in or out of Konoha without my personal approval. Go, he said authoritatively. The 2 Anbu quickly shunshined away and he turned back to Naruto. You're right, Naruto. I failed to protect you. Your father would be ashamed of me. He said sadly, but, no more. These civilians have forgotten that this is a military dictatorship and I am through playing games. I may be too old for this, but I will fight for you one last time, and I will win, he said forcefully, his eyes shining with strength long since forgotten. This was the sight that Anko shinned into. She stood silently before clearing her throat. When the Hokage turned to her, she was staring worriedly at Naruto. Is he okay? She asked. He nodded. He will be fine. Tell me, how much do you know? He asked seriously. She looked to the old Hokage and quietly sized him up. Everything. He removed my curse seal. She said, gaining wide eyes from the Hokage. He removed your seal. He said, honestly surprised. She nodded and smiled softly while pulling down her collar, showing her unblemished shoulder. Incredible, Sarutobi said as he shook his head. Anko Mitarashi. As of now, your job is to protect Naruto Uzumaki. I know you will do a good job. I have some house cleaning to do. Sarutobi said as he donned his cage robes and the hat. Anko nodded. Good. By the way, no one aside from myself is allowed into the office, understood? He said. Anko nodded again. Sarutobi nodded back and headed out the door just as the two Anbu returned to flank him. The Neko cat-masked Anbu nodded to her superior when he looked to her and said, "Your orders have been carried out. All Junin and Anbu are assembled and the council is convening as we speak, sir." Sarutobi nodded. "Go ahead of me and make sure every single council member is here. If they aren't, drag them here kicking and screaming if you have to. Return to me when it is done," he said, causing the two Anbu to bow and disappear. "No longer Naruto. I will set things right. If not for Konoha, then for you," he thought as he awaited his Anbu. Naruto's mindscape. Directly after seal removal, Naruto appeared in front of Hikari's cage, which was modeled as a two-story spa resort. "Hell no, I'm not going room by room, use your imagination for the setup." Naruto quickly strode up to the resort and walked into the den welcoming area. It had a giant TV and Hikari was panting sitting on the couch in front of it as she watched the Hokage speak to Naruto. Naruto smiled, along with Hikari, as they saw the Hokage start the way to recovering the Konoha that Naruto's father sacrificed his life for. Naruto smiled. "Thanks for healing me, Hikari-chan. I appreciate it," he said as he sat down next to her. Hikari immediately glomped him. "You baka. You should have just removed the damn thing when you could," she replied angrily. Naruto hugged her and said, "Mama, it all worked out. I'm just glad I can trust the old man again." Hikari separated from him and glared slightly. "He's still lying to you, ya know," she replied. Naruto waved his hand. "I'll ask him about that later. Besides, from the notes I got from Tu-san, it seems as if he thought my Ka-san would still be around. I have a feeling something else is afoot and it's not just Danzo," he said. Hikari sighed and nodded. "You may have removed that seal but you're still as forgiving as ever," she said. Naruto shrugged. "That's one thing you can thank the old man for. Although I'll probably punch him for it later," Naruto replied before muttering something about old men and their meddling ways. Hikari giggled. Fine, fine, would you like to wake up now? I'm pretty sure the council has convened and you can catch Danzo in the act," she said. Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time Danzo gets his due," he replied with a downright foxy smirk. Hikari's grin threatened to break her face. "Oh man, that dude won't know what hit him. I can't wait to see what Naruto-kun will do. I always love a good prank and or fight," she thought as she expelled Naruto from his mind. Council chambers. Same time. All the council members were in attendance. The various clan heads, Danzo, Homura, Kaharu, and the various civilians. The Junin Corp were assembled below the clan heads while the Anbu commander was sitting next to the Hokage's seat. The door burst open to reveal a very serious Hiruzen Sarutobi. Danzo was immediately on guard. "I know that old softy hasn't sent the demon container to the hospital yet. Did he die in Sarutobi's office? As soon as this is over, I need to begin setting up Homura and Kaharu so I can get off," he thought connivingly. Sarutobi stalked in and walked up to his seat before sitting down. Kaharu, as usual, stood up and looked to her aged teammate, Sandame-sama. "May I inquire as to why you have called the council into session? I was not aware we had a meeting today or any important matters to discuss," she stated, still unaware of the martial law. Sarutobi glared at her until she sat down. "As of 10:18 a.m. this morning, I have declared martial law in Konoha," Sarutobi said calmly. This immediately prompted several reactions across the room. The clan heads were mostly surprised, but other emotions ranged from curious, in most cases, to annoyed, in Hiyashi's case. The Junin were in much the same boat as the clan heads and were quietly chatting amongst themselves as to why this was happening. The elders and Danzo were eyeing each other warily. They may have to take drastic measures. The civilians were downright livid. Martial law killed all commerce and would hurt their pocketbooks. How dare the Hokage do such a thing? Sasuke Haruno, mother to Sakura Haruno, stood up and locked eyes with Sarutobi. Hokage-sama, you can't do that. According to the laws passed 13 years ago, the council must be informed before a state of martial law can be declared. What could possibly have been so important that martial law need be applied? She asked forcefully. Sarutobi released his ki upon the room and everyone was immediately sent to their knees. Danzo, the elders, and the ninja in the room were able to resist it somewhat, but the civilians were hit full force. I find it very curious that a ninja village, like Konoha, has its leader answer to a democratic council that is mainly made up of civilians. Sarutobi said calmly. He lessened his ki, but he was still putting out enough to make everyone nervous. I have grown complacent in the recent years. I was not supposed to take this hat again after Minato was appointed, but the Kyuubi saw fit to steal that from me. He made eye contact with all of the clan heads and said, however, I have had a wake-up call this morning and I will be cleaning house until my successor can be found. Surprise made its way across the room as several people started to gossip as to who could replace the aged legend. Danzo narrowed his eye and thought, could this have something to do with the container? I need to play my cards carefully here. Kaharu stood and looked to Sarutobi again. Who would you choose to succeed you? She asked. Sarutobi cut out his ki at this point, having felt that they understood his point. I was debating on that and I will be calling back both of my students to speak with them about this. As of now, I will not speculate. He answered neutrally. Danzo felt compelled to speak and said, you still have not answered why you declared martial law, he pointed out. Sarutobi smirked and was about to speak when the doors to the council room opened and Naruto walked in. Anko quickly followed him and smiled to the Sandaime, who seemed amused that Naruto was making his way towards the center of the room even as whispers broke out across the room. Sasuke stood up. What are you doing here? She screeched. Naruto winced and said, geez, who let the howler monkey into the council? Sasuke went red-faced and several snickers went out across the room. Danzo discreetly moved his hand into a seal and started channeling chakra to kill the boy. Naruto's head immediately snapped to the war hawk and he smirked. Care to tell us why you're channeling chakra one eye? He asked. Everyone's gaze turned to the old war hawk and he stopped his chakra flow. I don't know what you talking about, he stated neutrally. Sarutobi focused his gaze onto his old rival. Really? So that wasn't a hand seal to activate something nasty? He asked with a slight undertone of sarcasm. Danzo's eye widened marginally, but he simply responded with a curt, no. Naruto raised his hand and put his pointer finger out. His finger glowed with chakra and everyone focused on him. His hand suddenly blurred into action as it wrote a complex seal in under 20 seconds, stunning the onlookers. Fuin. Hireki. Seal. Revelation. Suddenly, two root Anbu appeared behind Danzo. The room broke out into shock as Naruto said, perhaps that is the reason for the martial law. Danzo growled and said, kill him. As the two root rushed forward, Danzo disappeared into a preset escape hallway that crumbled as he passed certain spots. The two root charged forward with Tantos poised to kill Naruto. Many of the clan heads and Junin were tensing to move, when Naruto smirked. His skin suddenly changed to a dull blackish gray color. His hair seemed to disappear and he became bald. His clothes morphed and became twin red lightning bolts racing down the front of his chest and down his legs. On his back they changed into a shape that resembled a hurricane, again red. His eyes stayed the same glorious blue and held mirth as the two Tantos struck his chest, and bent away from his body. He looks like Greed from FMA, meaning he does not have any genitalia in this form, with lightning bolts on the front and a whirlwind on the back instead of Greed's red lines. Naruto's hands blurred and he yelled out, Raiden, Kaminari Saji. Lightning release. Lightning surge. As he slammed his hands on the ground and electrocuted the two root agents. He stood up as Sarutobi looked at him worriedly. Naruto waved his hand, you shouldn't worry so much, Oji-san. They're heartless husks of humanity, he said simply. Sarutobi nodded and looked to the Junins, chase down Danzo Shimura. I want every Junin and Anbu level ninja on this, Anko excluded. Chunin are to patrol the village and keep martial law. Go, he said. The Junin bowed and won and vanished. He turned to the civilians. As of now, the civilian council is being reinstated as an advisory council only. You are dismissed, he said forcefully. The civilians grumbled but didn't want to mess with the Kami no Shinobi at full force. He turned to the elders and glared, you two are going to Ibiki to determine whether or not you knew of Danzo's plans, he said and snapped his fingers, causing two of his trusted Anbu to appear and drag the two protecting elders off. He turned to the Shinobi Council and said, I hope I have your support during this time. They looked at one another until Sume Inuzuka stood up smirking ferally, you've got my support. I've been telling you to get rid of that old coot for years. What caused it? She asked. Sarutobi chuckled at her rather direct approach. Anko and Naruto were both smirking. Actually, you have young Naruto-kun here to thank for that, he said, causing the clan heads to look at him warily, all except Sume, that is. She took one look at him and her mental jaw dropped, holy hell. That old bastard. I'm gonna get him for lying to me. I wonder if I still have that marriage agreement, she thought. As you can tell, she figured out just who the young boy was related to, now that he had removed that orange jumpsuit. Remember, the jumpsuit had the Genjutsu seal on it. Hiyashi coldly said, I highly doubt Uzumaki-san could bring you evidence of Danzo's subterfuge. Shikaku Nara muttered troublesome, as Sarutobi turned a glare to the Hyuga clan head, are you calling me a liar, Hiyashi-san? He asked in an icy tone of voice that would make many a Hyuga jealous. Hiyashi visibly stiffened, not at all, Hokage-sama. I simply find it unlikely that Uzumaki-san could uncover something even Anbu cannot. He replied carefully. Sarutobi sighed, the evidence was on Naruto-kun himself. Apparently, Danzo had placed a seal that bore an uncanny resemblance to your caged bird seal, Hiyashi-san. Sarutobi said. Hiyashi's eyes visibly widened and he looked at the Hokage. I will be sure to do a thorough investigation into that allegation, he stated. Sarutobi nodded, very good. However, enough of that. I would like to ask for the clan's support during this time, he said. Sume simply nodded and said, you have the Inuzuka's support, Hokage-sama. I'll pull our retired trackers into duty to try and find Danzo. Sarutobi nodded in acceptance. Shibi stood up, the Abarames support you, Hokage-sama. I too will ask some of our retired members to assist in Danzo's capture, he stated. Sarutobi smiled in seeing two of the best tracking clans in Konoha aiding him so greatly. Inoichi Yamanaka, head of the Yamanaka clan, stood and said, the Yamanakas are behind you 100%, Hokage-sama. We will be happy to interrogate Danzo's route. Sarutobi nodded once again, a mind walk would be good to take care of the interrogations. Shikaku Nara, head of the Nara clan, muttered his clan's famous, troublesome, and said, you have the Nara's support as well. We will assist in the planning and capture of the various cells Danzo may have around town. Sarutobi smiled, the Naras were famous tacticians and would make storming the cells much easier and effective. Shuza Akamichi, head of the Akamichi clan, stood and said, the Akamichis are happy to stand beside you, as always, Hokage-sama. We will focus our efforts on keeping the peace. Sarutobi nodded, the Akamichis were powerful shinobi that civilian and shinobi alike were wary to anger. Hiyashi Hyuga stiffly rose and said, you have the support of the Hyugas as well. I will personally see to it that the caged bird seal information is secure and all those with its knowledge are accounted for. Sarutobi stared for a moment before nodding, letting the man know that he expected it done. Hiyashi may have been proud but even he feared the professor. Sarutobi smiled softly, thank you for your assistance and support in this matter. I will be in my office so please send all reports there. He turned to Anko and Naruto, I will speak to you two later. For now, please go somewhere safe. It's rather obvious you have a safe house if you were able to hide your abilities, he said. Naruto and Anko nodded before disappearing. Sarutobi nodded to the clan heads and they disappeared as well. Neko Cat appeared beside the aged Hokage as he snapped his fingers. I need you to sweep the office and these chambers for bugs. After that, join the search. Dismissed, he said before he headed to his office. He had letters to write to his two wayward students. It was time for the Sannin to return home, permanently. Naruto's lab. Sometime that night, Naruto and Anko walked into the lab and Amaterasu smiled at them. Did it go well? She asked. Naruto smiled and nodded. Very well, thanks for asking. I still have a few questions for the old man but they can wait a few days while he cleans things up, he replied. Anko just walked over to the bed and plopped down. She was still tired from a mission the other day. She promptly went to sleep, feeling very safe inside this lab. Hikari materialized outside of Naruto and quickly glomped him as he sat down on the couch. You scared me earlier. Don't do that again, you got me, she said, worried about his health. Naruto smiled and kissed her, surprising her and causing a 10-minute game of tonsil hockey. When they broke, they noticed Amaterasu was staring with a slight blush on her face. I'll try not to scare you again, he said with a smirk. Hikari just smirked at Amaterasu. Ami-chan, she said sing-songily. You wouldn't wanna switch places with me, would you? She asked sweetly. Amaterasu's blush immediately went full face and she sputtered for a few seconds before her two friends started laughing. She promptly crossed her arms and said, meanies, causing another bout of laughter from the blue-eyed couple. Later that night, Hikari, Naruto, and Anko were snuggled into bed with Naruto being happily glomped by both females. Amaterasu smiled softly seeing the three people comfortably asleep. She shook her head and thought, those three are truly a group. A demon, a Jinchuriki, and a disgraced pupil. Still, I have a feeling that Naruto is destined for greatness. She watched them for a minute more before walking up to the bed and putting her hand on his head. With a small flash, she stepped back with horror across her face. If I wasn't bound by kami rules, I'd destroy half this city. It's a wonder he can still smile, she thought. Slowly a smile spread across her face. Then again, that settles things. It seems I may have a gift for you, Naruto-kun. I hope you can survive it though, she thought as she disappeared from the material plane. Kami's court. Midnight. Amaterasu appeared and sat down at her seat among the court. Kami turned to her and Kami's face was grave. Have you made any progress in locating Orochimaru? She asked seriously, causing all eyes to turn to the sun goddess. She sighed and shook her head. Unfortunately not. I was able to find the boy that Kyuubi-chan told us about. She was correct. He can remove the curse seal and I feel he may eventually have the power to rid us of Orochimaru for good, she said. Several murmurs rippled across the room until Sora Ryu, Kami of the Dragons, stood up. Ha, I bet none of you thought you'd see him again. Check my first fanfic for his description, that is very impressive. I'd wish to test the boy myself if you are saying what I think you're saying, he said as he fingered his twin scimitars. She smiled. I need a second endorsement, but yes. I believe him to be worthy, she stated. Sora smirked. Very well then, I'll endorse him too, he said, shocking many present. Ryujin had never endorsed anyone. Kami quelled the growing murmurs with a loud silence. She then turned to Yami. Shall we then? She asked. Yami chuckled. If he has their backing, then yes, we should. Besides, we need a champion to take down Orochi Tem, she replied. They turned to the court and said, in 3 weeks' time, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze will take the immortality trials. Ryujin shall test his honor and courage. Sora smirked and let out a roar of approval. Inari shall test his cunning and intelligence. A man with short red hair and red eyes stood up with a smile that was eerily reminiscent of Naruto's own, and Susanoo shall test his heart and determine his place A man with black hair and stormy gray eyes smiled as he looked to his sister. This is gonna be fun, Susano said. The rest of the gods immediately broke out in gossip as to whether or not the mortal would be pass his test. Yugito ni was having a bad day. Why was she having a bad day? Well, that stems back to the council of her village, and her status in the village. You see, the council has been putting pressure on the Yondaime Reikage of Kumo to put her under a loyalty seal. Now this, what's the word? Ah yes, nifty little seal would make Yugito a mind slave to the council. You see, Yugito was not your average 18-year-old female Junin. She was, in fact, an 18-year-old female Jinchuriki, and that made all the difference in the world. The council believed her to be a flight risk, and that, seeing as she was the container for the Nibi no Nekomata, they should have complete control over her actions to ensure her loyalty, not that it had ever been in question. She knew what they really wanted. Most of Kumo respected Killer Bee, Jinchuriki of the Hachibi, because he was the shield that protected them, not to mention he was the brother to the current Reikage. Unlike Killer Bee, however, Yugito was still treated rather harshly. They weren't obvious about it, more like calling her demon whore and cat behind her back while being overcharged or refused service in some places. She was never physically abused, and for that she was happy. However, the council wanted her to be their personal toy. She knew it. After all, they had several S-rank seduction missions that they had attempted to send her on. She had refused every single one of them because that wasn't her specialty. Not to mention, she was a virgin and proud of it. Oh sure, she had dated a few guys, but they all seemed to just want to brag to their friends that they had tamed the demon. Yeah, they wouldn't be taming anyone else because they were still in the hospital. She sighed. Long story short, she was having a bad day because people had been treating her worse and worse after finding out about the council's proposal. Her spotless reputation was being called into question, and she had just come from yet another council meeting where they grilled her for some obscure mission. Not to mention the subtle hints that if she just took the seduction missions then they would leave her be. She just wanted to be left alone and respected like Killer Bee. Was that too much to ask for? Still, there were some good points in her life. Samui ni, a miniature Tsunade without the strength, was her sister in all but blood. Ever since they had met under Killer Bee's training, they had been close, and she thanked her stars that Samui was always there to aid her. Omoi and Karui were also pretty good friends, but they were more engrossed in their little love-hate game than worried about helping her. Killer Bee and it's pronounced A, had been protecting her rather well. She could turn down the council's missions with E's approval, which he always gave, and B had helped her to master Nibi's chakra. Nibi was a sore subject, but she had grown to like Yugito over the years and ended up agreeing to share Yugito's senses in return for control of Nibi's chakra. So far, they had a pretty good relationship, almost like that annoying older sister that claims it's your conscience, or in this case your perverted side. You see, the Nibi no Nekomata was a very horny cat, pun intended. She loved to tease Yugito about guys, and even girls, that piqued her interest, and she was a shameless being when it came to describing the acts she would take against said peoples. Needless to say, Yugito learned early on to control her blushes, for the most part, and to ignore the perverted ramblings of cat who's been deprived for 18 years. She simply shook her head free of these thoughts and continued her walk home. She sighed in contentment as she walked into her apartment. It was good to be home. Still, she mused, it would be nice to have someone to come home to. Unknown casino, hotel room. Same time, one day from Donzo's flight. Tsunade was furiously packing her things away. Why was she running around the room with her head cut off, you may ask? Well, just a few minutes ago, she won the jackpot on the slots with enough money to pay off all her debts and a bit more. Now, when the legendary won, she knew something bad was going to happen. After all, the last time she won, she had to deliver Kushina's baby and the Kyubi had attacked. Yeah, She didn't get to enjoy those winnings. Too bad for her. Her instincts were correct. A small puff of smoke appeared behind her and she turned around to view a white and red monkey. One of Sarutobi's personal messengers, as a matter of fact. He held up a scroll with the kanji for family, and said, Hiruzen said to give this to you. I am not to leave until you give me an answer. He said seriously before plopping down on top of Tsunade's suitcase. Tsunade glared at the small primate but sighed and snatched up the scroll before applying some blood and opening it. Not even a minute later she roared, Shizune, causing her wayward apprentice to appear in the room by some cosmic power. Shizune huffed. She had just run up 9 flights of stairs because she had finished sending off the money to the debt collectors and wanted to relax a bit before Tsunade blew out of here. She suddenly heard, Shizune, causing her to double her speed and appear in front of her shisho. What is it, Tsunade-sama? She asked curiously. Tsunade glared at the small primate in the room. Pack your bags. We leave for Konoha in 3 minutes. We will be there in 4 days, she said, answering the primate's unspoken question. It bowed and disappeared to its next assignment. Shizune was stunned but quietly happy. She did miss the place she had grown up in, although she did wonder why they were returning. They quickly packed and set out. It was time to meet Tsunade's godson. Female onsen. Somewhere in Kuni, hot springs country. Perverted giggling could be heard throughout the surrounding forest near a female-only hot spring. This was the great toad sage Jiraiya, author of Ika Ika Paradise and a self-proclaimed super pervert. He was doing research for his next book, which meant he was currently peeping on 3 girls who were having a whose is larger competition. This probably doesn't happen in real life, but in my FIC, it does. Yahoo Go girls. Needless to say, Jiraiya thought he hit the jackpot. Too bad for him, Tsunade's luck was rubbing off on him. The same little primate appeared in a puff of smoke behind the perverted man and sweat dropped as he saw the man didn't even notice him. He cleared his throat 3 times, being ignored every time, before sighing and kicking the man into the onsen while yelling, pervert, and chuckling as the girls kicked his with their divine fury. When Jiraiya finally returned, he glared at the small primate. The monkey just chuckled and handed the scroll to Jiraiya saying, Hiruzen told me to wait for a reply. Jiraiya nodded and opened the scroll, being oddly serious for once. His eyes widened and he quickly took off running. 4 days. He yelled back to the monkey who smiled and disappeared. Hokage office. Same time. The small monkey reappeared in front of the aged Hokage. He bowed to the aged Hokage, who simply nodded back, and said, They will arrive in 4 days, Hiruzen. The Sandaime nodded and waved his hand in dismissal. The primate bowed again and disappeared. He had already received his payment prior to the assignment. It had been a full day since Danzo had been found out by Naruto's actions. Hiruzen had his best searching for the man, but they were having a hard time. Homura and Kaharu were still screaming in their cells about being released, but he just ignored it and ordered Ibiki to take his time with them. He knew he would have a lot of explaining to do when they arrived, but he was putting that off for now. He sighed and took another puff of his pipe. He heard his guards telling someone that he was not to be disturbed before the doors were thrown open and in walked one Sume Inuzuka and her companion Kuromaru. She glared at the aged Hokage and, despite his earlier reinforcement, she was still pissed with him. You have some explaining to do, Sarutobi-san, she said seriously as she slammed the door shut behind her, and in the guards' faces. He glared back at her, while sending some of his rather substantial ki at her, reminding her just who he was. I was not aware I had to explain myself to the council, Inuzuka-san, he stated coldly. Sume was slightly put off but shook off his words, and ki, before slamming down some papers on his desk and impatiently tapping her foot at him. He sighed and grabbed the papers. He took a good minute to fully read over the papers, his eyes widening as he did so. He put them down and rubbed his temples. Leave us, he ordered the hidden Anbu. They quickly appeared and bowed before disappearing. He reached under the desk and activated a security seal that the Yondaime placed in the room. He then looked to the clan head and said, I would deny that he's alive, but I think this may do the boy some good. Besides, I was planning on informing the boy of his full heritage sometime later this week. After his display in the council room and the help he gave in producing evidence against Danzo, I believe he has earned at least that. Sum smiled. So you will honor the agreement? She asked happily. Hiruzen smiled softly. If they so wish it, yes. Still, he may have a thing for Anko Mitarashi, so that may get in the way. I will have to speak with him. However, if the girls come to some sort of agreement, I suppose I could mend a few laws to make that work as well. He said with a smirk that screamed, I just want to get my grandson as much tang as possible. Sum rolled her eyes at that smirk but chuckled. I'll speak with Hana about it and, hopefully, they will connect, she said happily. She waited for the Sandame to stop chuckling before saying, you still need to explain why you hid him like that. Why hide his heritage and yet release his status as a Jinchuriki? She asked seriously. Sarutobi sighed. That was a mistake, but Kushina was supposed to be alive. Without her to protect him, Iwa could have easily killed him. It is a flimsy excuse considering what the village did, but, at the time, it made sense. I believed they would follow Minato's last wishes to see his son as a hero and not the demon. Foolish really. He said sadly. Sum sighed softly and sat silently for a minute before nodding. I understand your position and will not begrudge you for it. Still, when you inform the boy of his parents, would you be kind enough to let me know? I would like for Hana to be here as well,